As a child, I grew up with two pictures in my house, John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. And probably unlike many of you, we didn't have frames, so they were just taped on the wall, because that's all we had. And what I remember is that the house had a basement, and we had a two-way switch, so if you turned on the switch at the top, and you turned it off downstairs, you had to then turn it back on downstairs in order to be able to have light. And so it was very typical that my brother would turn the switch off downstairs because his bedroom was down there, and that when I went to turn it on, I couldn't. And so I had to walk down in the dark to turn the light on at the bottom. But what I knew was that I was walking with Martin Luther King Jr. And so I was good. I struggled with being the black person who was going to stand up here and talk to you about Martin Luther King Jr. And yet I think that for a lot of people of color, there are stories that are deep inside, that sit within our DNA, and that the facts that get regurgitated about those situations and about those people, about Martin Luther King Jr., they lose something in the expression because what's deep in the DNA doesn't end up coming out. There's this knowing that lives in your gut very often as someone of color, where situations that have occurred in history just hold a different meaning. And so we didn't have a picture of MLK Jr. just because we wanted to have a picture of MLK Jr. We had a picture of him because he represented hope for my family. And my parents never talked about segregation at all, but I knew that they fled to San Francisco because they wanted to get as far west as possible. And they embedded in me the idea of hope, the idea that things could be better. And so every time I saw that picture of him, it meant something. And so I think that sometimes we miss something that's really important when we just regurgitate the facts over and over. So I want to visit Martin Luther King Jr. with you through the lens of a word that is very typical in spiritual communities and also here, and we will use it here. I made Momo nervous when we saw how many times light was showing up. But I'm going to talk to you about darkness, and I just want you to be open to the idea that it's not a place of fear. It has been used as a racialized term for many people of color, so that things that have to do with dark aren't good. It's this connotation of a place of emergence, the place that's bad, that doesn't serve us, that we need to get into the light, the good place, where we need to be. And it sounds good, but I wonder if we can just be in the darkness for a little while and see what we can learn from it, see how we can breathe through it, and maybe we can hear the darkness as something that represents not an absence of divine spirit, but a presence of understanding, or a place where we can go where knowingness occurs. So I'm not suggesting that we ban those words, but at a time such as this, I think it's important for us to expand our understanding so that we look at things a little less as a dualistic kind of lens, a binariness, how we view things as good, bad, light, dark. I'm hoping that today you can widen your lens just a little bit and find a different way of seeing the darkness and holding the life of Martin Luther King Jr. There are biblical stories and events of things that occurred in the dark, and we can go on to the next one. The Bible talks about Jacob wrestling with the angel in the darkness. In fact, Jacob getting his blessing in the darkness. The liberation of the Israelites and Exodus from Egypt that happens at night. Prophetic dreams and messages that occurred in the darkness of sleep. The stories depict Jesus as being born in the darkness, resurrected in the darkness. The creation story is said to have happened in the darkness. And so, although darkness as we know it is often associated with challenges and losses and struggles, King Jr.'s father had a revelation in the darkness that led him to his spiritual work and a new name. And a lot of people don't know about this, but a new name and a commitment to a new spiritual way of being. So he completed a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, and then from that pilgrimage, he went to Berlin, and there he is with his son. And he learned about Martin Luther, and he really loved the fact that Martin Luther had a more liberated theological viewpoint, so much so that he decided to change his name to Martin Luther. His name was Michael. So Michael King Sr. became Martin Luther King. And even after he changed his name, people still called him Mike, who knew him. But his son also started to carry on the spiritual work of his father, and he decided that to be in line and aligned with his father, that he was going to change his name as well, and so then he became not Michael King Jr., but Martin Luther King Jr. And people still called him Mike too. King Jr. met people in the darkness of their social or political or financial or religious devastation and disenfranchisement. And from that place, he did some of his most inspiring work, and the work that we now know was work that he did from a place that many people would consider in the darkness. When in 1965, only 2% of Selma's eligible black voters, which is like 300 out of 15,000 black people, managed to register to vote, thousands of people engaged in what was called the Selma March. And a lot of people have heard of that. You probably saw the movie. It's not totally accurate. But people organized to protest the blocking of Black Americans' right to vote. And although many people think of the Selma marches as being one, it was actually three. There were 3 marches in a period of 14 days that occurred. And one was just a couple days later, and then one was about a week and a half later. So the first one, March 7th, was co-planned by John Lewis, which many people don't know, who was 25 years old at the time and suffered a fracture to his skull by trying to do this march and being stopped. The next one was 2 days later, led by Martin Luther King Jr., and it's called the Turnaround Tuesday because he went to the Pettus Bridge, and then at the request of the president, they turned around and still the KKK killed Reverend James Reeb because they were just upset that this was happening at all. And then the last one was on the 21st, which culminated in the death of white activist Viola Liuzzo, who was transporting people to get them to a part of the place for the march and was killed. What I want to say about that is that although people remember the fact that there was a march and they say that that was a great thing that MLK did, that if you can imagine having marched, being beaten, being chased by police on horses and whips and batons, and going back 2 days later, and then going back another week and a half after that, that's what makes the march so incredible. That people did not stop, that they continued, that they fought, that they spoke up when they didn't know what was present. They were in the dark, and from the place of darkness, they continued moving forward. They continued to fight until what ended up happening after March number 3 is that there was a declaration that was created by the president to allow voting to happen. You can stay right there, actually. And what a lot of people don't realize, especially in the movie Selma, it doesn't exactly picture this person right here. This is Rabbi Abraham Heschel. And he happened to be really close, almost best friends with Martin Luther King Jr. He was always there. There was one march that he missed. Every other time he was there, and he was actually in the front every single time. He had a health condition, and so his family was always wondering, was he ever going to make it through the march? But he stood. He stood by Martin Luther King Jr. He stood on behalf of civil rights. He stood as a representative of many other Jewish leaders. He never stopped. And you can now read information from his daughter, because she was shocked that he didn't show up in Selma, because he had such an incredible part of being an ally along with King Jr. So during that time period, people were fearful, they were angry, they were desperate, they were watching people falling by the wayside, and it's meeting from that place, from a place where people continued to struggle and continued to say, when is this going to stop? We are continuing to fight, we are continuing to try, but when is this going to end? That Martin Luther King delivered a speech in which many people call it, "How long, not long." Can we hear a part of that? Ooh, let's hear it too.
I know you're asking today, how long will it take? Somebody's asking, how long will prejudice blind the visions of men? I come to say to you this afternoon, however difficult the moment, however frustrating the hour, it will not be long, because truth crushed will rise again. How long? Not long. Because no lie can live forever. How long? Not long. Because you shall reap what you sow. How long? Not long. Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Let that scaffold sway the future. Behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch above his own. How long? Not long. Because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. How long? Not long. Because my eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He's trampling out the village where the grapes of wrath are stored. He's loosed the faithful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. He has sounded forth the trumpet that shall never call retreat. He is sifting out the hearts of men before his judgment seat. Oh, be swift, my soul, to answer him. Be jubilant, my feet. Our God is marching on. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah.
Not only was he reaching them in a place of darkness, but so was he. He had no idea what he should be doing. He had no idea where things were going to end up. He was being asked not to continue this work by many different people. He was uncertain, and in that place of uncertainty, in that place of confusion, he was there with them. He met them where they were, in their place of confusion and in their place of uncertainty, and gave them the ability to sit in the not knowing. When they marched to Selma, they had no idea what to expect, whether it would change, whether they would return, and he didn't know either. You are in the darkness of this journey, he was saying, and I will be there with you. But the way will become clear it will change. Rabbi Heschel said, for many of us, the march from Selma to Montgomery was about protest and prayer. Legs are not lips, and walking is not kneeling. And yet our legs uttered songs. Even without words, our march was worship. I felt like my legs were praying. And when the Voting Rights Act of '65 was presented to Congress and President Johnson signed the bill, they were able to see that that work that they had been doing bore fruit. MLK Jr.'s best work to me shows up in sermon pieces like that one that not a lot of people have read about. In 1967, and we can go to the next slide. This shows the trajectory of the things that were happening to them and how often they were going and the things that continued to affect them. And it is from that, it was from that place that they continued to work and that he continued to speak. And so sometimes he was diverted to another place. He would attempt to speak in one spot and somebody would say, no, actually we need you here because there's something else that is going on here. And you can go to the next slide. And so in '67, he was committed to a speaking engagement at the Spectrum Sports Arena in Philadelphia 6 months before his assassination. But he was contacted by a junior high school principal who said, but there's something going on here with our young people. They're so agitated over what's going on, and they feel even more helpless than the adults. We're so fearful that they are going to get involved in race riots and lose their lives or become imprisoned. And there had already been a lot of race riots in Philadelphia and mistreatment and arrests that they were seeing and that they were seeing happening to their parents. And so they went to Martin Luther King Jr. and said, please, can you just fit in being able to speak to these young people? And so he spoke, and it's called What is Your Life's Blueprint? He spoke to them about what it means to create a blueprint of your life that will change who you are. And if we can hear that.
When a building is constructed, you usually have an architect who draws a blueprint. And that blueprint serves as the pattern, as the guide, as the model for those who are to build the building. And a building is not well erected without a good, sound, and solid blueprint. Now, each of you is in the process of building the structure of your lives. And the question is whether you have a proper, a solid, and a sound blueprint. And I want to suggest some of the things that should be in your life's blueprint. Number one, in your life's blueprint should be a deep belief in your own dignity, your own worth, and your own somebodyness. Don't allow anybody to make you feel that you are nobody. Always feel that you count. Always feel that you have worth. And always feel that your life has ultimate significance. Now that means that you should not be ashamed of your color. You know, it's very unfortunate that in so many instances Our society has placed a stigma on the Negro's color. And you know, there are some Negroes who are ashamed of themselves. But don't be ashamed of your color. Don't be ashamed of your biological features. Somehow you must be able to say in your own lives and really believe it, I am black but beautiful. And believe it in your heart.
And so he took out time just to speak to some junior high school students because he knew, wait one sec, he knew that he needed to bring them to another place out of where they were, to be able to see something in the darkness, to see that they were someone. I love his word, somebodyness, that you have somebodyness. There's a woman, Barbara Brown Taylor, who in her book, Learning to Walk in the Dark, says, we are never more in danger of stumbling than when we think we know where we are going. When we can no longer see the path we are on, when we can no longer read the maps we have brought with us or sense anything in the dark that might tell us where we are, then and only then are we vulnerable to divine protection. And so King Jr. went on to say, and now we can hear that other part.
I would say to you, don't drop out of school, and I understand all of the sociological reasons why we often drop out of school. But I urge you, in spite of your economic plight, in spite of the situation that you are forced to live so often with intolerable conditions, stay in school. And when you discover what you're going to be in life, set out to do it as if God Almighty called you at this particular moment in history to do it. And just don't set out to do a good Negro job, but do a good job that anybody could do. Don't set out to be just a good Negro doctor, a good Negro lawyer, a good Negro school teacher, a good Negro preacher, a good Negro barber, a beautician, a good Negro skilled laborer. For if you set out to do that, you have already flunked your matriculation exam for entrance into the University of Integration. Set out to do a good job and do that job so well that the living, the dead, or the unborn couldn't do it any better. Falls your lot to be a street sweeper. Sweep streets like Michelangelo painted pictures. Sweep streets like Beethoven composed music. Sweep streets like Leontine Price sings before the Metropolitan Opera. And sweep streets like Shakespeare wrote poetry. Sweep streets so well that all the host of heaven and earth will have to pause and say, here lived a great street sweeper who swept his job well.
Under the most challenging conditions, these young people had to learn how to navigate the darkness. And there was a reporter that I spoke with in preparation for this talk. It was really nice because he wrote this quite some time ago. And I said, are any of those students who were there still present? And he met with a number of them to find out whether or not they were touched by King Jr.'s words. And so I'm going to tell you where it ended. Jeffrey Miles, after hearing that talk, abandoned gang life, and rather than dropping out of school as he planned, completed high school, college, became an optician, sent his 3 daughters to college, which he doesn't think would have happened if it wasn't for that 20-minute King's speech. Earl Wilborn took that feeling of self-worth and channeled it into a long teaching career at the Susquehanna Township School District, While there, he worked to expand the district's focus on diversity, integrating King's work into his regular lesson plans. Andre McCarter won a national basketball championship at UCLA under coach John Wooden and played 3 seasons in the NBA. In 2015, the YMCA of the USA hired Kevin Washington, another student, as the first African American president and CEO of the YMCA of USA. All of them were examples of people who heard King Jr.'s words and who moved from a place that brought them somewhere. They recognized their own somebodyness. Do we have it, or shall I go on? I should keep going, okay. So, only when it is dark enough, King Jr. said, can you see the stars? Only when it's dark enough can you see the stars. He knew the difference between darkness and freedom because he knew about the freedom fighter Harriet Tubman. Oh, looks like we have it. Okay, all right, so let's go to the last video. He knew about Harriet Tubman, who used darkness as her life-saving vehicle. Back then, the darkness was a place of refuge for enslaved people because that's how they could escape. It wasn't in the light of day. It was in the dark of night. And so Harriet Tubman viewed the darkness as being a place of navigation, a place of looking to see where she could move next, how they would move next, how they could get to freedom, and how freedom meant being able to navigate the darkness before the day. And Martin Luther King knew that. He knew how to touch people from that place and to say, from that place that you're in, from that place that may feel uncomfortable, from that place that may feel like you don't know where to go, from that place that may be challenging to you, from that place that may be making you feel as though you are absolutely nothing, pause and walk through the darkness because you can get through it. You can learn how to walk through it. You can navigate yourself in it. And in fact, it's a place where if you pause and if you think clearly, you'll be able to see things that you may not have seen before.
But I ain't going back. I won't be free.
There's not much time. It's near midnight. You got to be miles away from here before dawn. Now I need you to remember what I tell you. Can you do that?
Yes, sir.
Fear is your enemy. Trust in God. The North Star will guide you. Follow that North Star. If there are no stars, just follow the river. If you can't see the river, listen for it. When the river split, cross the high bridge over the Russian Creek and head straight north.
What we did see there was that she went to a church and a minister gave her what she needed to be able to navigate her freedom and said, you need to go in the darkness. You need to go while it is night. You need to travel under the cover of night because the night will protect you. And you need to look for the North Star. So traveling under that cover of night offered the best chances of escaping. Most enslaved people didn't have maps. They didn't have compasses to guide them. They had to successfully navigate themselves knowing the darkness really well. Escaping slaves or freedom seekers could find it by locating the Big Dipper. If you've ever looked up in the sky and found the Big Dipper, the most visible in the night sky in late winter and spring, and that's when they would usually go. I see you're trying that again. So I think that King's greatest work was to teach people to question what the darkness teaches them and to move forward. For Harriet Tubman, it was her way to freedom. It was her time to move. It was when she would find her North Star. Her North Star was her path of fulfillment or purpose. As a North Star tends to remain fixed, when all the other constellations move around, it's that fixed destination that you can depend on as the world changes drastically around you. And when you find your North Star, then you know where you're headed. The answer may be soft. You may have to listen carefully and closely to hear it. It may come with a voice of someone. It may be your inner child. It may be a simple, visceral, persuasive clarity. But to find your North Star, you have to be in the dark. To find your North Star, you have to be in the dark. Martin Luther King Jr. knew that he couldn't tell people of color to get out of the dark and find the light. They were full of far too many situations, far too many idioms using the phrases of light and dark to pin darkness on people of color as bad, worse, inferior, and they are phrases that we now tend and need to take care of when we use it, when we use those concepts of darkness and color flippantly. Darkness and inferiority, darkness and segregation have far more outcomes for people of color. And he knew that they knew what it was like to be in the dark and to be considered something that was negatively dark. He knew that the darkness could have a different meaning. He knew that people of color lived in a darkness along the trajectory of the moral arc of the universe. And although he quoted abolitionist Reverend Theodore Parker saying that the moral arc of the universe bent toward justice, he knew that was not where they were then. So his work was how he helped people to walk in the darkness, to navigate the darkness, to live with and through the darkness, to not fear the darkness, but to use the darkness to find their North Star. To be human is to live by sunlight and moonlight, it has been said, with anxiety and delight, admitting limits and transcending them, falling down and rising up. So to lift up and see the way out, Martin Luther King Jr. helped people to see life without polar opposites. Faith and doubt, light and dark. Not opposites necessarily, but key components on the road to freedom that will not exist without the other. My son has a poster of Martin Luther King Jr. in his room and has always had it. I don't even know when he got it, but every time he has moved, that poster has moved with him from place to place and is always in his room. And I like real art. It isn't. It's a poster. It probably reminds him of my mom's house. But I said to him, can you tell me why you still have that poster? Because he also had one of Marilyn Monroe, but he doesn't still have that one. And I said, why do you still have it? Why has it stayed with you no matter where? And he said, Martin Luther King Jr. was a strong black man at a time when it wasn't safe to be one, at a time when it wasn't safe to be as outspoken as he was. He was someone who stood up when it was not the popular thing. And then he said, are you quoting me for something? And I said, yes, I am. And so I think that what we need to take away from this is not the same words that we've always heard about Martin Luther King Jr., but the ones that we haven't. And not just the things that he said, but where he was when he was saying those things, what the situations were, where that situation of darkness was that he was speaking from, who those people were who aligned with him and who stood in the darkness aside and aligned with other people who were navigating the darkness as well. And that we don't need to fear the darkness. What we need to do is to learn how to walk in it, how to navigate ourselves with it, and that we remember his words, as I walk through the darkness, I see the stars of freedom. And so can you say that with me? As I walk through the darkness, I see the stars of freedom. And another one, I can walk with the darkness to find my North Star. I can walk with the darkness to find my North Star. Amen.